Hello from Baristicos Hamburg. Today we have a very interesting machine from Portugal, the Arkel Coast. It's a machine we haven't heard much about until now. And we want to change that, but see for yourselves. The Arkel Coast, as I said, is an interesting machine that we received from the company Brew to test. We actually met Lucas recently at the Frankfurt Coffee Festival. Lucas is one of the 3 owners of Brew, and he immediately agreed to provide us with the machine. So we didn't buy it, but we still want to test it just like any other machine we either purchase or in some cases are provided by the manufacturers. And so that we can perhaps change that a bit in the future, meaning so we can buy more machines to test for you, we would be thrilled if you would subscribe to our channel and activate the bell. That way you'll always know when a new video from us is released. The company Brew is actually better known for customizing machines, for wood applications, accessories, coffee, and all sorts of things. You can really order your machine customized there. That means if you want a pink machine, they'll paint it pink for you. I find that very interesting. We already knew of the company, but we hadn't met them in person until the Frankfurt Coffee Festival. In the case of the Arkel Coast, Brew business model is a little different because they are the general importer for the Arkel Coast. And as far as I know, they were somewhat involved in the development and passed their feedback on to Arkel during the development phase. You can see this pretty clearly on the Brew YouTube channel. They're similar to us. Lucas presents machines, tools, and so on. It's a great channel, definitely worth watching, so check it out. But don't forget to subscribe to us and stick around. The fact that there are several channels worldwide dealing with the topic of coffee, machine tests, and so on, I think is very, very exciting for you. Because it means you can get different opinions and insights, which will ultimately help you if you're interested in the topic of machines. At this point, I'd like to say another big thank you to Brew and especially to Lucas, who really demonstrated this machine for us here. And that was a lot of fun. But now for our first impression of the machine. It's big, it's heavy, and it is really excellently built. The materials used are all high quality. The housing is mostly made of powder-coated stainless steel. Only the front area here and the area below the brew group are made of glass. And I think that has 2 advantages. First, it looks super chic, at least in my opinion. That's not a real criterion, of course, but it's also exceptionally easy to clean. As I said, the rest of the housing is made of powder-coated stainless steel, except for the lower drip tray cover. That part is ceramic-coated, which makes it particularly scratch-resistant. Overall, a lot of stainless steel was used anyway, not just for the housing and the boilers, but the brew group is also made of stainless steel. The same goes for the portafilter, but I'll get to that in a moment. The interesting thing about the brew group is that there were apparently some difficulties in the initial phase because it was made entirely of stainless steel. You can see this very clearly in one of Bruce's videos. They had criticized that. Arkel reacted to the criticism during the development phase because the portafilter was apparently a bit unpleasant or difficult to lock in. You can see that very well in one of Lucas's videos. And they installed a brass core there, and as a result, the portafilter is now very easy to lock in. There is, however, a small disadvantage, or rather, it doesn't really concern the brew group, but is a result of the size of the housing. Because we have a very, very deep front section here, almost 17.8 centimeters. And if you're very tall and the machine is positioned a bit lower, you might have to search a little for the first 2 or 3 times to lock the portafilter in properly. But as I said, after trying it 2 or 3 times, that's no longer a problem because then you've got a feel for your machine. And as I mentioned, the machine is quite large overall. It has a width of 37.8 centimeters, a height of 40.6 centimeters, and a depth of 37.5 centimeters. And that's with a weight of 23.5 kilograms. Currently it costs 2,290 euros here in Germany. And for that you get quite a lot of machine with some very interesting features. The machine has 2 stainless steel boilers, so it is a dual boiler, and you can also switch the boilers on and off separately. So you don't have to do it via the software. But with these switches here, the steam boiler has a capacity of 1 liter and the brew boiler has a capacity of 0.75 liters. As I said, both boilers are made of stainless steel and they're insulated. The heat up time is somewhere around 12 to 15 minutes, but you'll see that in a moment in our detailed temperature test. The stainless steel boilers have another advantage, and that is that they can be drained. That means you can flush them. In other words, you can descale this machine. You can't do that with most dual boiler or heat exchanger machines, or rather, it's not recommended by the manufacturers that you descale them. With this one, that's not a problem. It even comes with a descaling kit because you can drain the water and thus flush the boilers. The machine has a 2.5 litre water tank, although we've found that you should fill it with a maximum of 2.4 litres because otherwise it gets a bit tricky when inserting the water tank. You take it out from the back. To do that, you have to remove this lid here and then you can take out the water tank. Of course, that's a bit inconvenient for machines placed under cabinets, but most machines are designed this way, and here we see something special. In this tank, you can insert a Brita water filter. This filter is actually normally used in a fully automatic machine, and ECM and Profitec were the first two companies to use this filter, because we still consider it to be probably the best filter on the market in terms of descaling, meaning the care of your machine, and also in terms of taste and water quality. And it seems that gradually more companies have discovered that ECM and Profitec use this, and we've already seen, I believe, 3 other machines at the Frankfurt Coffee Festival that use this filter here. And we think it's great because we've had very, very good experiences with it. There's a sensor built into the water tank, so the machine notifies you in time when the water has run out, and you always have a last shot function. This means there's still enough water in the tank for your last espresso to at least finish brewing and not stop in the middle. And not only is the water tank very, very large, but so is the drip tray. I think this is one of the largest drip trays we've had so far because it holds about 1.4 liters. That's gigantic. Removing the drip tray is very, very simple. You just have to take off this cover here. It feels a bit tinny, but it looks excellent. You have to say that because this ceramic coating looks really good and high quality, and you don't notice that it's a slightly thin piece of sheet metal, but it's very well made. This means all the edges are welded and are properly ground, and it all looks high quality. It feels a bit tinny. And you simply pull the drip tray out from the front, and as I said, it holds 1.4 liters. That's insane. Putting it back in is of course just as easy. You just slide it on here, and it sits and fits perfectly. The distance between the portafilter and the drip tray is about 10.5 centimeters, so you can also fit larger cups plus a scale underneath. The brew group is a saturated brew group made of stainless steel, as I said, with a brass core inside, and that of course promises us higher temperature stability, but we'll come back to that later. And because it's saturated, not only does the brew group heat up quickly and properly, but so does our portafilter, which is an advantage. When you remove the portafilter, you'd think it's a Famer E61 brew group. The bayonet is also very, very similar, but the diameter is a tiny bit smaller. This means, unfortunately, you can't fit standard E61 portafilters into this brew group. But that's not really a disadvantage because the portafilter itself is made of stainless steel, very high quality, very heavy, and feels wonderful in your hand. And if you don't just want a double spout, but also a portafilter with a single spout or a bottomless portafilter, you can order those separately. One thing I particularly like about this portafilter, besides its beautiful wooden handle, is that the end cap is also made of stainless steel, a matte stainless steel. It looks very, very elegant. Because there's a lot of weight at the back, it sits very well in the hand. But what I find special is that when you place it on the countertop, it's almost level. Unfortunately, only almost. It tilts forward by about 0.2 degrees, but that's more or less negligible. Unlike most other portafilters, it's nearly level. This means when you place it on the table, you'll most likely be temping very straight, and that will have a positive effect on the taste of your espresso. 2 vibration pumps are installed in the machine, one for the extraction and one for the steam boiler. And that's because we have the ability to manually regulate the pressure, or rather the flow, of the machine ourselves. The pumps are very quiet. We measured a volume of 60 decibels during extraction, which really isn't very much. Frothing the milk is of course a bit louder, but that's not due to the pump, but rather the steam and the frothing process itself. But I'll get to that in a moment. The machine has a dual manometer, one for your steam pressure, of course, and the other for the extraction pressure. The water outlet is time-controlled via this touchscreen. You can set the time so that you always get a very, very precise amount in your cup. The good thing about the hot water outlet is that the water isn't drawn from the steam boiler but from the brew boiler. This gives you a much better temperature for example, your Americano or possibly a Lungo. And that brings us to the steam wand. And later, of course, you'll see how we froth milk with it, and I can already tell you it's extremely impressive. It's double-walled. There's just one small problem with the steam wand. It is indeed double-walled, not with a Teflon tube, but apparently with an internally built-in tube. But because there's so much mass here, the temperature transfers from the nozzle to the lower part of the steam wand. Unlike normal double-walled steam wands, this one gets extremely hot. We actually burned ourselves. Of course, that's not the point of the whole thing. But ultimately, it's not a problem. Because we have a heat shield here, thank God. Because as I said, you can't touch it down here, but you can touch it up here. And you can also touch the heat shield without any worries. We let the steam run for a really long time. I think after 2 minutes we stopped at some point because we didn't find that this part gets hot. So you can touch it here without any problem, even if you let it run for 2 or 3 minutes. It doesn't get really hot. It's only this lower section that gets hot, which is a bit of a shame, but you'll see that frothing milk with this machine and this nozzle is really fun. It's truly very impressive. And what's also very nice about frothing is that the lever has 2 functions. This means if you flick the lever back once, a little bit of steam is released. And if you move the lever forward, you can turn on the steam permanently and regulate it. The cup tray up here gets a little warm. Not extremely warm, but it's enough to pre-warm your cups. However, we always recommend pre-warming your espresso cups with some hot water anyway, so your espresso stays warm in the cup for a bit longer. The machine has a PID controller. The menu navigation is very, very intuitive and simply designed, so you don't really need to read the instruction manual, and you operate the menu mainly using these 3 buttons. This means here we enter the menu, and with the plus button we can now set various parameters. For example, a pre-infusion. We can set the eco mode. For example, we can set a boiler priority. This means if you don't want the machine to draw too much power at once, if you have poor wiring, for example, you can set it so that when the extraction boiler heats up, the steam boiler turns off. And once the extraction boiler is hot, the steam boiler naturally turns back on. We can set an automatic brew head cleaning. This makes backflushing the brew group easier. We can descale the machine, as I mentioned earlier. We have a drink counter and, of course, a built-in shot timer. For the pre-infusion, we can set 2 parameters. First, how long the pump runs initially, and second, how long the pause should be. The machine isn't equipped with volumetric controls, but rather with a timer, and that too is very, very easy to set. We have several buttons here, one for espresso shot A, espresso shot B, a continuous pour, and hot water. That's it, but that's all you need. And setting it, as I said, is very, very simple because, as I mentioned, we don't need to go through the menu. Instead, we just press and hold this button for a little longer. 1, 2, 3, and then the machine starts. And by pressing it again, the extraction time is programmed. And this applies to both extraction times and the water dispenser. And the interesting thing about the extraction times is that they don't follow the classic approach of saying, okay, we have a single shot and a double shot. Instead, it's essentially freely programmable or configurable. This means you can assign these 2 buttons individually. For example, you might want to program your fruity espresso to button A, and on button B, perhaps your slightly darker classic Neapolitan espresso. I actually think that's a really great approach. And as I said, it's super simple to program. And before we get to the lever on the left side of the machine, from your perspective, which is not the water dispenser, since we have a button for that here, just a few quick words about what's included. First, as I've already mentioned, this double spout portafilter is included. I've already talked a bit about it, but what I forgot to mention is that it comes with an 18-gram IMS Precision competition basket. That's an excellent basket. It's really, really fun to work with. Then we have a very nice tamper, also crafted from wood and always featuring this Arkel logo. Then there's a small brush, and then, of course, there's the user manual. It comes with the Brita filter along with a test strip so you can test your water. We get a small cleaning set with it, which includes a brew group cleaner and a bit of descaler. I've already mentioned that the special thing about this machine is that you can descale the boiler. And with that, you basically have everything you need to get started. One question that naturally comes up is, why is it only delivered with a double spout portafilter and not a single spout, or perhaps even just the bottomless portafilter? As mentioned, you can of course order everything else separately. Arkel's reasoning for this is that an espresso generally tastes a bit different, more intense and better when we use a double basket compared to a classic single basket. For those who are interested, we once made a video about this, which we'll be happy to link for you. In it, we tried to find out, or rather to explain, how you can also manage it, though of course only with a very special basket, to make a single espresso taste just as delicious as an espresso from a double basket. So, and now let's get to the exciting part of this machine, which is this lever right here. With this lever we can regulate the flow rate and consequently the pressure. Now you might say, why do we need that? We already have a programmable pre-infusion after all. This means we can set how long the pump should run, and then on top of that we can also set how long the pause should be. That's the same thing, isn't it? Well, yes, but primarily no. It's something completely different. You see, you have to imagine it like this. Most machines control their pre-infusion via the pump's runtime. That means the pump turns on, then I tell it to turn off, then we have a pause, and then the pump turns on again for the extraction. That works quite well, but it's different from using flow control. It also depends a bit on which pump you have installed. For example, do you have a rotary pump installed or do you have a vibration pump installed? And if, for example, you have a vibration pump installed, which one is it? Because vibration pumps regulate the pressure buildup very, very differently. For instance, you could have a very simple pump that turns on and reaches its 9 bars relatively quickly. And then there are, for example, the silent green pumps from OLO, which build up the pressure very, very slowly, so a bit more gently. It's different with rotary pumps. They build up their pressure to 9 bars quite quickly. And of course, all of this has its pros and cons. This machine does that, just like almost all other machines. But it's different with this lever here, because here a valve opens and I can regulate the flow of the water. That means when I operate it, the valve opens and the water flows out. And so we can regulate it so that in the initial phase of our pre-infusion, we let a small amount of water with low pressure flow onto our coffee puck. And in principle, that is then very, very similar to how it works with E61 brew groups, for example, if you install a paddle on top. This means we can control our pre-infusion much, much more gently. And so in principle, it's similar to the way lever machines control their pre-infusion. And anyone who has ever had an espresso from a lever machine knows how delicious that can be. And one factor for that can be the pre-infusion, but also the entire pressure profile of a lever machine. Another advantage of this lever is, for example, if you've accidentally ground your coffee too coarsely. That means if you see your espresso is running way too fast, you can use this lever to change the flow rate and save your espresso. We can take a closer look at this by taking a portafilter that has a pressure gauge built into it and carefully see what we can achieve with it. Now we'll adjust it. Now we can apply pressure again. And that's how we can control our pressure very nicely. Okay, and now let's try to save an espresso that was ground too coarsely. Let's just give it a try. We'll now take our scale and watch the weight. And I hope, I can't say for sure, but I'm assuming that we've ground it too coarsely. And we're not extracting based on time now. Instead, we're working by weight. And I can already see it's running much too fast. And now let's reduce it a bit. I want to have about 36 grams. We've now reached 36.6 grams. Wonderful. But I didn't watch it exactly, I'll check again in a moment, but I think we took over 30 seconds. I prefer to drink this coffee after 21 seconds. But let's just see what came of it. Normally it should be very, very bitter now. No, totally interesting notes. Very delicious. It tastes really, really delicious. So it has a tiny bit of bitterness in it, a little too much, a slight astringency, but nothing dramatic. Normally, after such a long extraction time, the coffee should have been totally bitter. And that's how we can save our coffee if you know your coffee and if you've experimented a bit with this controller. And that brings us to the heat up time, the temperature stability, and the machine's consumption. The manufacturer states that the machine has a heat-up time of 15 minutes. And we can confirm that, we actually managed that. You always have to consider one thing when measuring the heat-up time, and that is the room temperature. That's why we always try to have a room temperature of about 20 to 22 degrees. And the machine must stand for at least 24 hours in that environment so it can acclimate, and so that the machine is really completely at that 20 to 22 degrees. The problem is that we have a lot of metal. And if you, for example, live in a cold cellar with maybe 16 degrees in winter, the water is at 16 degrees, the machine is acclimated to 16 degrees, then of course that doesn't work with the manufacturer's specifications. That simply means every gram of the metal here must first be heated up. And the colder the ambient temperature is, the longer that takes. It's different, of course, if you live in the attic and we have a temperature of, say, 35 degrees, then the machine heats up much, much faster, of course. And that's why you sometimes have to put the measured heat-up times into perspective, because you never know at what ambient temperature the tester started to test their machine. We, as I said, always try to be around 20 to 22 degrees, because that's a general room temperature. Now, we had a small problem here. Our room temperature was at 18.5 degrees. And the second problem is we have a full portafilter here. Our measuring portafilter didn't fit in there. I had already mentioned that it's not an exact E61 bayonet, so we had to use a bottomless portafilter to insert our measuring unit. And a bottomless portafilter heats up much, much faster. So in that respect, it compensated a bit. That means, on the one hand, the slightly too cold room temperature, and on the other hand, the bottomless portafilter that we used. It was this one here, of course, without the pressure gauge. We inserted our measuring basket there. So in that respect, it was a bit difficult, of course, but the results we achieved were very, very good. We were very surprised at how well the machine performed. After 15 minutes of heat-up time with a 25-second flush, we always do that beforehand, we actually reached a temperature of 91.8 degrees. That means we were really only 0.2 degrees below the 92 degrees we wanted to reach. And that, I have to say, is a great value. And then we looked at the temperature curve and how temperature stable the machine is. Our measurement protocol is set up so that before the actual extraction, we do a 5-second flush. We did that the whole time, and we were able to determine that the machine at the beginning takes a tiny little bit of time to get to 92 degrees. That was a very short and completely unproblematic time. Then we found that the machine, during this 25-second extraction time, heats up by about 0.6 to a maximum of 0.8 degrees. And it did that very consistently. So in that respect, a fantastic value. 0.6 to 0.8 degrees is just great. But now we wanted to find out what would happen if we just left out this 5-second flush time. Then we actually reached our 92 degrees a little faster. But we had the effect that during the extraction time, we went a bit over 93 degrees. We didn't want that, so we tried again to set a rinse shot, and this time we went down to 2 seconds. And lo and behold, that worked great. So we got to our desired extraction temperature very quickly, but afterwards we didn't go significantly over the 92 degrees. Usually, it was 92.2 degrees that we reached at the peak. And that is a fantastic value. Regarding power consumption, we couldn't find anything special. It's about average for all machines. That means, from switching on the machine to the first espresso shot, we used about 0.252 kilowatt hours. Up to the first cappuccino, meaning including frothing the milk, we used about 0.259 kilowatt hours. And over the entire test cycle, meaning from switching on including 10 test shots, we used 0.358 kilowatt hours. That's absolutely within the normal range. And of course, if you don't want to make cappuccinos, you could also leave the steam boiler switched off, and that would of course save you a bit more power. But before we get to the conclusion, I'd like to drink a properly dialed in espresso. And that's what we're going to do now. So, and I hope that we've found the right grind size now. We'll see in a moment, because we're going to record the whole thing and show it to you. And here we go. As you've seen, our shot ran a little too long. That means we need to refine our grind size a bit more, but I'm going to try it anyway. I know, but it looks good. It looks very tasty. Yeah. Well, it is very tasty, but just a tiny bit too bitter for my taste. So we're going to set the grinder a bit finer now and pull one last shot and see what we get. Now we have our new grind size, and we'll simply try it one more time. Oops, now we have even a little less than a ristretto. Let's see how it tastes. I quite like that. Incredible dark chocolate flavors come through. But that was not the result we wanted to achieve. So once again, almost spot on. I would have preferred 32 grams, but we now have 30.6 grams in the cup. And then we'll give it a try. Yes, it does smell a bit different. A very delicious espresso. It has a wonderful body, incredible creaminess, and tends towards chocolatey notes. We are currently experimenting with a roaster and trying to find our own roast for our courses, and I think we are already pretty close. Very tasty, a fantastic espresso. The machine performed wonderfully. But before we come to the conclusion, we would of course like to show you how to froth milk. And first, let's make ourselves an espresso. The milk is now at 16 degrees. That's obviously very cold. The great thing is, I can also easily regulate the steam. And here we are, just a moment, let me measure. At exactly 65 degrees. And our espresso is ready, or rather it's almost become a ristretto. I was actually hoping it would be a ristretto. But you see the milk, it has a wonderful texture. And now we come to our conclusion. Who is this machine for? Does it have advantages? Does it have disadvantages? I must admit, we haven't been able to find any disadvantages. I don't know what other people's experiences with this machine are, but I must admit it has completely won us over. It was done for fun. Not only does it deliver delicious espressos, but I also find this lever very, very exciting, with which we can experiment a little. You can't program all of this, that doesn't work here. You have to work manually, and we've just shown you that. I have to say, in terms of value for money, it's in a very, very good range. Let's not forget, we have a dual boiler for about 2,300 euros. It's really on par with many other machines. Overall, it's very large, which means you just have to consider if it fits in your kitchen or not. The usability is excellent, and I personally find the menu navigation to be outstanding. Everything is reduced to the essentials. Everything is quickly accessible. I find the heat-up time of 15 minutes to be perfectly acceptable. And what impressed us is the temperature stability. It has a temperature range of about 0.6 degrees, and with our recommended 2-second flush, it's even significantly lower than that. So all I can say is it's an exciting machine that we had a lot of fun with. Please just write in the comments what you think of the machine, whether you've had a chance to test it, perhaps at a trade show or at someone's home. We'd be very interested in that, of course. Finally, all that's left for me is to say thank you. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, we'd be thrilled if you did. Turn on the bell, feel free to leave comments and especially likes, because as I said, that helps us move forward and take another step. Until next time, we hope you enjoy a delicious espresso and coffee. Thank you very much for watching and see you soon.